Hello and welcome to the viewers of this video. This is the Orange Fan here, bringing you another entry for the episode Recap and Thoughts category. This video will be dedicated to the B segment of episode 9 of Codename Kids Next Door, Operation C.A.M.P. We begin this segment with 4 of the Sector V operatives arriving at Camp Lemmeouttahere through 2 scouting vehicles. Number 2 and number 3 are in one of the scouting vehicles, while number 4 and number 5 are in the other scouting vehicle. And the 2 scouting vehicles land in 2 different locations within Camp Lemmeouttahere. The 4 present Sector V operatives are investigating and observing the camp at the instructions of number 1, who suspects that the camp counselor is up to no good. And the 4 present Sector V operatives are reporting their findings to number 1 through walkie-talkie. Based off of the observations of the 4 present Sector V operatives, the campers don't seem to be miserable at all. All the Sector V operatives notice is that they're making items. One group of campers are making wallets, while another group of campers are making lanyards. Number 1, however, tells them that appearances can be deceiving and encourages them to stay alert. For number 2 and number 3's location, number 3 notices some rustling in nearby bushes, and she brings this to number 2's attention. Number 2 and number 3 discover the cause of the rustling in these bushes are a baby. At this point in time, we, the viewers, do not see the baby, but we can hear the baby. And number 2 calls out to anyone if anyone lost a baby. But then number 2 and number 3 look at each other, and they non-verbally come to an agreement. Later on, we're back at the Sector V treehouse now, and number 4 and number 5 are in the central control room of the treehouse with number 1. They're waiting for number 2 and number 3 to enter the central control room so that they can begin briefing regarding the recent observation and investigation mission at the camp. And number 1 calls out to number 2 and number 3 with a microphone to get their attention. But number 2 and number 3, though, arrive in a very hasty manner, and they urge the 3 other Sector V operatives to keep quiet so as to not wake up someone known as Bradley. Number 1, number 4, and number 5 question who Bradley is, and number 3 does reveal Bradley to be the baby that they found. Yeah, the baby that she and number 2 found at the camp. And we actually get to see Bradley this time. Bradley is a baby skunk. Number 2 and number 3 figure that Bradley's family's den must have been within the area of the camp that their scouting vehicle landed in. And they figured that the landing of the scouting vehicle must have caused Bradley to be separated from his parents. So until they can find Bradley's actual parents, number 2 and number 3 have decided to take up the role of Bradley's parents for the time being. Number 4 admits that Bradley is rather cute, and number 5 is honored when number 2 and number 3 request her to be Bradley's godmother. Number 1, however, is growing rather impatient about this, saying that they have a mission that they need to think about right now, and he insists that they complete this mission tonight. So we do see the Sector V operatives are making their preparations for this mission, but they're also, or at least the 4 of the Sector V operatives are dividing their time between preparing for the mission and taking care of Bradley in some way. And number 1 is progressively growing more and more irritated about this. And eventually, though, they do eventually set off on their mission to reach the camp by means of a flying vehicle, although they are delayed a little bit when number 2 has to make sure to get something for Bradley in the treehouse, but eventually they do set off on their mission. At the camp, we do see the camp counselor has gathered the campers together, and he's trying to figure out who made the most wallets and lanyards for tonight, and he's trying to encourage them to make the most wallets and lanyards for the next days or the next following days. And although, the segment doesn't reveal the camp counselor's name, and even the credits just list him as counselor, but later entries in the series reveal that the camp counselor's name is Chester, so we'll be calling him Chester for the rest of this Recap and Thoughts video. So with the kids next door, or the Sector V operatives I should clarify, on their way to the camp, Number 2 is trying to feed Bradley while also driving the vehicle at the same time. And Number 1 tells Number 2 to let him, Number 1, drive because he's distracted by Bradley, and Number 1 calls Bradley stupid. And Bradley starts to cry. And Number 3 angrily tells Number 1 to take back what he said, but Number 1 insists that as a skunk, Bradley has no real feelings. And Bradley continues to cry, but then suddenly he lets out a stink stench, and this causes Number 1 to lose his balance and coordination, and he accidentally hits the power button, which causes the flying vehicle to crash onto the camp next to the campers and Chester. The Sector V operatives and Bradley exit the bus. That's what it is. It's the cool bus. That's the name of the vehicle. And Number 1 introduces the campers to them, the kids next door, and tells them that they're here to rescue the campers. The campers are just confused. They're just confused as to why. And Number 1 explains his suspicions that the camp counselor is up to no good. And Chester reveals, yes, Number 1 is right. And Chester even compliments Number 1 for figuring out his plan. Chester's plan was to use child labor to make a lot of wallets and lanyards at low prices. But Chester refuses to surrender. He says a word, and this word seems to trigger mind control, because when he says the word, the campers are now brainwashed and are listening to Chester's orders, and Chester orders them to destroy the kids next door. So the campers repeat this with glowing green eyes and in a monotone manner, and they're preparing to attack the Sector V operatives. But Bradley, while he's scared, he lets out his stink stench, and it turns out Bradley's stink stench is actually able to negate the effects of the methods that Chester has used to brainwash the campers. Unfortunately, it doesn't seem to last very long, because Chester is able to grab hold of Bradley, and the campers are now back under the mind control influence. And Chester plans to, Chester is planning to do something bad to Bradley, and Bradley cries once again, and suddenly two big by skunk standards. Two skunks appear, and they're big even by skunk standards. And the Sector V operatives realize that these two skunks are Bradley's actual parents. So, and they unleash their stink stench, and it's significantly more powerful than Bradley's, because it seems to permanently undo the mind control on the campers. And Chester is furious that his plans have been foiled, and Bradley manages to use his stink stench on Chester as well. So Chester has been defeated now. We then cut to the next day, because the sun's out now, and the Sector V operatives are still at the camp. Number 1 admits that he was wrong to be so harsh with Bradley, and he apologizes to Bradley for yelling at him and being dismissive of him. And he says that Bradley did great work on the mission. So Numbuh says that Numbuh says that Bradley is now an honorary Kids Next Door operative, and he dubs Bradley Number 6. And Numbuh admits that Bradley actually is rather cute, but the segment ends with Bradley unleashing his stink stench, which causes Numbuh to lose his coordination. So this segment brings this segment introduces two characters who go on to have more appearances later on in the series. Maybe not a whole lot of appearances, but still a few appearances. Tom Warburton even acknowledged on one of his blog posts that he didn't anticipate these two characters appearing as often as they ended up appearing. So it sounded like these two characters were only intended for this segment originally before they ended up becoming recurring roles. And those two characters are Number 6, aka Bradley, the skunk, and Chester. Now, Chester, while some of the villains in the Kids Next Door seem to have a consistent theme to them, Chester kind of changes his, I guess you could call it his profession, Chester actually does have a consistent theme to him. He's motivated by greed. That's his main motivation, because Chester's motives are always about lining his pockets with money. That's his big motive. But he changes his costume or his outfit multiple times. Now, whenever Chester appears in like a group, when he has cameos with group appearances with multiple villains gathered together, he usually takes on his camp counselor outfit, which he wore in this segment. But he has taken up different outfits and different outfits or professions, if you will, in his other major appearances. I would say, Chester manages to have a major appearance in at least season 2, season 3, and season 4 each have a major Chester appearance in them, like this segment was for season 1 for Chester. But I think Chester does appear in season 5 and season 6. Yeah, he appears in those seasons as well, even if it's to a lesser extent and not as the central villain of a segment or an entry. And yes, Bradley, aka Number 6, does go on to appear at least 2 more times. Off the top of my head, I remember Number 6 having 2 more appearances, and we'll cross those bridges when we get to them. But yeah, and I guess you could argue that Bradley's appearance here, there might be some, you could make the argument that there's some early installment weirdness in this segment because of how Bradley becomes a Kids Next Door operative. Because Bradley is made into a Kids Next Door operative by Numbuh at the end of the segment, and he's given the designated number of Number 6. And this seems to contradict, it seems weird when looking at later entries in the series, because the season 2 finale has Numbuh mention to another character that he doesn't have the authority to make someone a Kids Next Door operative. And a later entry also reveals that the Kids Next Door operative gets to choose their own designated number, and they have to put it in a DNA identification device. We'll go more into detail about that as we reach that particular entry. But one could also probably make the argument that maybe Number 6's circumstances are different due to the fact that Number 6, aka Bradley, is a non-sapient being a baby skunk. He's not sapient like a human, for example. So maybe that has something to do with it. And Numbuh did refer to Number 6 as an honorary Kids Next Door operative, so maybe that has something to do with it as well. But yeah, I guess fans have come up with explanations for that early installment weirdness. Speaking of which, this segment could also be seen as highlighting Number One's earlier characterization, which differs from his more consistent characterization later on. An example of characterization marches on, if you will. Although at the same time, it does still highlight characterizations of Number One that stay consistent throughout the series, like his dedication to the Kids Next Door organization and his tendency to be a conspiracy theorist, with moments of him being properly paranoid, as was the case in this segment. But here, Number One does come off, season 1 portrays Number One as a little more high-strung, maybe, or maybe no nonsense, but more short-tempered than he's portrayed later on. And he does kind of act like he's surrounded by idiots when compared to his teammates in season 1, at least earlier season 1. It's by as early as the season 1 finale, that's probably when Number One's more consistent characterization kicks in for the rest of the series. But the conspiracy theorist with tendencies of properly paranoid and his dedication to the organization are consistent. But yeah, it's a pretty cool look to highlight differences and similarities with Number One's characterization throughout the series. And let's see, anything else? This segment also seems to be what made the Number 2 and Number 3 pairing popular among some fans. Although based off of my observations, the Number 2 and Number 5 pairing and the Number 3 and Number 4 pairing, those two pairings are much more popular than the Number 2 and Number 3 pairing, at least based off of my observations. But it is pretty interesting to see what I presume to be the origins of this particular pairing. But otherwise, I believe that's it for now. So this segment does introduce an ally and an enemy of the Kids Next Door that end up appearing more often than Tom Warburton had originally anticipated. And like we said, it could still be seen as an example of early installment weirdness. But otherwise, there we go for now. So as of this video, we've now discussed the B segment of episode 9 of Codename Kids Next Door on this channel. Take care, and until next time.